Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
This is Susan Kaufman, and you're listening to ADHD Experts from Attitude Magazine. One of the most painful aspects of parenting children with attention deficit disorder or learning disorders is our children's problems making and keeping friends and forming relationships that are enduring. Our guest today is Michelle Garcia Winner, and her topic is social thinking. She is a speech therapist, a language pathologist by training, and a specialist in students with social and cognitive challenges. She's an internationally recognized expert in the field, spoke in over 10 countries last year on the topic of social skills for children. Michelle has a private practice in San Jose, California, works with clients and consults with families there. For those of you who are not in California, she also has a terrific website that I recommend to you called socialthinking.com. So among the topics she'll address today are: what are social skills? How do we teach them to our children? How can your child master all forms of social interaction? What's the vocabulary of social engagement? And how do you help map your child's social skills to put him or her on the path to success? Dr. Winner, thank you so much for being here today. We're very grateful, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts.
Hi, so I'm Michelle, and I'm actually not a PhD. I actually just have my master's degree, but I do give trainings to doctors. I do grand rounds for psychiatrists, psychologists, and all. So anyhow, we're going to talk today about what's social thinking. I'd started in the field of autism back in the 70s and did a number of different things in work environments as a speech pathologist, working in hospitals and all. And in the mid-90s, I chose to work in the schools because my children had become school-aged, and I had no idea what a speech path does in the schools. Neither did the school. And it was right around the time when Asperger syndrome, and I know this is an ADD conference, but this is all related, so hang in there. So it's when Asperger syndrome first came to everyone's vision, and I found that I was used to working with classically autistic folks on teaching social skills. So you taught them a skill, you had them kind of memorize and practice the skill, and you expected them to deliver that skill in all different situations. And when I started working with adolescents in the high school who had a lot of language and reasonable to high intelligence, they would just argue with me about why they should have to do the skills, and they didn't care. They didn't care how I felt. They didn't care how anybody felt. They didn't care if they had friends. And the game changed. These were really argumentative kids rather than my low language kids. And so I had to start thinking about why do we even do social skills? What are they? Where do they come from? And then the more I started playing with ideas related to teaching social or understanding the concept of social, I started getting more and more students referred to me. And what I noticed was that there were all different diagnostic labels. And I was getting plenty of kids referred who are ADD, ADHD, as well as so many other diagnoses. So here's a slide, if you just click through, of so many of the different diagnoses. And this is a short list. There could be a much longer list of diagnosis related to social learning problems. So as much as I'm doing a talk today for an audience of people interested in ADD and ADHD, this is not a talk just about those labels. We're talking about kids with social learning challenges who tend to have near normal to way above normal language and learning skills. I do a lot with the gifted and talented. And over the years, my work now applies from kids who are starting to master language at 3.5 all the way up through adulthood. Our oldest client we see at our clinic is 72 years old. So I found that the diagnostic community is not at all on point in agreement as to what diagnosis. So I'm sure many of you listening in, if you're family members, you've experienced many, many diagnostic labels typically. If your child's 15, you usually have more than one, if not 6 different diagnostic labels attached to your child. So what's important about that is the treatment that we're doing for social is not based on a label, it's based on a learning problem. And after years of this work and working with so many clients, I believe strongly in the multiple intelligence model, that we have science smarts, but we also have social smarts, and some of our guys can be really bright or reasonably bright in certain areas, but they're not necessarily bestowed with great social intelligence. and regulatory skills, and there's those interplay with each other. So I developed social thinking back in the 90s simply to work with my high school kids. And what I started to look at was that social skills you don't start with social skills, nor do you, that's not the entire interaction, that actually what really hubs up and maintains the social interaction and maintains friendships and relationships is the fact that we think about each other. So I named what I was doing social thinking, because if I kept calling it social skills, parents kept thinking their kid was just learning a skill they should practice and memorize, and I wanted to convey that there's a deeper process. So I'm going to go through just introducing the definition of social thinking. So anyhow, this is also a paradigm shift because we're very behavioral in our teaching, and I think one of the challenges of families who are working with kids who are living and professionals with ADD, ADHD is that the message that you often get is that there is no treatment, or just put them in a social skills group, but that's really just, nothing much. And really what you need to do is get them on medication. And while we're not dismissing at all the importance of medication, what I've done through social thinking is really talked about, hey, for kids with strong language, reasonable to strong language and learning skills, let's provide a whole different shift. Rather than focus on their behavior, let's focus on the thinking that is driving the behavior. So social thinking is the ability to consider your own and others' thoughts, emotions, beliefs, intentions, knowledge, to help interpret and respond to the information in your mind and possibly through your behavioral interactions. So our thoughts in our mind are social thoughts, and we interpret people through what we're thinking about different people's thoughts and intentions. If we're sitting at home watching a TV show, we have to interpret the characters. I like watching Grey's Anatomy because I like watching the social emotional dysfunction of a group of doctors, but I have to get inside of their thoughts and minds to have to figure all that stuff out. If I'm watching the news in the United States, I have to know what news channel I'm on because there's a political bias now in our different news channels, and so we have to try to interpret what's their intentions as they're giving this to try to figure out what story they're telling us through the news. Watching the Super Bowl, we're going to be rooting for one team or the other based on our own biases. So that's social thinking, and that's tied to our social cognition. And in our what we do in our mind is we navigate our own thoughts and feelings and understand other people's thoughts, feelings, intentions to try to make meaning. Our social mind makes meaning for us. And then as we get into the next part of the definition, I assume you guys are now on the slide of what are social skills. Social skills, you take the social thinking you have in your mind and you adapt your abilities, you adapt your behavior based on the situation and what you know about people in the situation for them to react and respond to you in the manner you had hoped. And with many of you guys have heard of the concept of executive functioning, working with people with ADHD and ADHD. However, when you hear about executive functioning, most of us think about it as something we use in order to get our work prepared for school, to get organized with our materials, to get out the door on time. And we don't realize we use social executive functioning even in our social interactions. So with our social skills, you and I have a plan. We have a goal. We want people to think about us in a certain way. And so our social behaviors are something we can adapt in a situation if we're aware of the situation. And the people to figure out what are we supposed to do to impact how people are thinking about us and how do we want people to think about us. It's pretty remarkable that you and I do this. People with what we call neurotypical social skills do this without even, without really consciously putting this all together, but you do it every time you're around someone else. For example, if I'm in a room all by myself, I'll scratch my body anywhere it itches. But if one person walks into the conference room to perhaps bring water in, I will no longer scratch my body anywhere it itches because I'm thinking about what they'll be thinking about me. So our social skills are something we adapt, but they're not something we memorize. And that's the big difference. Is in the past, we've taught people to go into social skills groups and basically use eye contact, do turn taking, don't interrupt. But you can't really do any of that effectively if you're not doing the thinking part around it. And it also gives you a choice for how you want people to interpret you. And I know, with our folks that we're talking about today, basically everybody with social learning challenges, they have trouble with self-regulation, that they do in that moment what they feel like doing or what they think they need to do in that moment without considering outside of that actual moment of what they're thinking about how it's being interpreted. So the kid is cracking a joke in the class all the time because he wants people to include him and think he's funny, but he doesn't realize in that situation with the teacher and the other students that even if kids are laughing, they may not really be embracing their humor, his humor. They may be having really weird thoughts about him. He's making them feel uncomfortable because he's using humor at the wrong time and place and person. So that's social skills, is how much we have to drive our behaviors based on the thinking and based on the outcomes that we want. It's a lot of past thinking and future thinking. And then the question is, why do we use social skills? When I was working with a high school group at my clinic a couple of years ago, the high schoolers were like, well, I don't want to do all that. I don't want to think about what you're thinking and think about what I'm thinking and think about what you're thinking about what I'm doing and figure out what you're doing. That's just too much. So we started studying that, like, why bother? Why bother doing any of this stuff? And then what he realized was that it impacts how we make people feel, which impacts how they feel about us, which impacts how we feel about ourselves. Basically, everything we do socially is emotional. The social skills we produce are because they affect how people feel, and the social skills other people produce affect how we feel. And so some of you are probably listening and saying, yeah, but my kid just doesn't care. He says he doesn't care, or she says she doesn't care. And the reality is, as I work with these clients, what I find is that virtually everybody I work with cares how people treat them. They just don't understand that other people care how they're being treated. So our folks often have a very kind of me-centered approach in the sense of, I can do this, I feel like doing this. It really shouldn't affect you the way you say it does because I didn't really want you to get upset, so that you shouldn't have gotten upset. Where if somebody else does the same behavior, they don't like it at all. And so part of treatment is getting them to understand how we affect each other, that we're responsible to each other, and that we have to spend that extra, millisecond time thinking through some of this information. So if we move to the next slide, through social thinking, we teach information and related skills in a manner that avoids assumption. One of the mistakes I think we often make as teachers and even parents at times is we listen to our kids, we hear how articulate they are in some areas of their learning and how bright they are, and then we just assume they should be able to do the social stuff, right? Because it's what the government calls our soft skills. Social skills are often written up as our soft skills. Or in the Obama administration, one of their folks in talking about preschool programs talked about teaching academics and non-cognitive skills, which is somewhat humorous to me that they would refer to social skills as non-cognitive, because I don't really know where else they would come from but our brain. But I think it's fair to say that we don't appreciate the impact that we don't appreciate the depth of intelligence it requires, social intelligence, to really navigate the waters of social behavior and social thinking and emotional impact around that. So we're really teaching through our program social awareness and increased social problem solving as part of this larger package. And no matter what age we would begin with our clients, we always start with at a really basic level. If I'm working with an executive who's an adult, or I'm working with a teenager or a little kid, we begin with some of the basics, and we created what we call social thinking vocabulary as really user-friendly language. So for example, in schools, they'll say, oh, we're teaching a social curriculum. We teach kids to negotiate, respect, cooperate, be polite, pay attention. But if you look at any one of those words, those are really abstract concepts. If you didn't just figure it out intuitively, you don't really understand what cooperation means. Although you may say it all the time. I've got kids who yell at other kids saying, you're not cooperating. But when you really look at what's going on, the kid who's yelling it's not cooperating. He just wants everything to go his own way. So we use language, and we think because our kids can say these big words, they must understand them. And that's where I come in and go, I don't think so. I don't think our guys understand these bigger social concepts. Let's break them down. So I created what ended up being called social thinking vocabulary. For example, we teach kids about the power of their eyes and how you think with your eyes. We don't just say use eye contact. That's a very static idea, is you just look at someone and that solves the problem. Because what I found from my students is that many of them didn't know what they were looking at. Kids who blurt out in class may often be missing reading some of the first cues. If they if they used their eyes to think about who the teacher was talking to at that moment and they followed the teacher's eyes, they could see the teacher wasn't talking to them, that was not a time for them to make a comment. So we use thinking with our eyes to help our kids learn to do social observation. We absolutely don't teach eye contact. I was working with a boy with high-functioning autism, and whenever anyone said use eye contact, he lifted his chin and he stared down at the floor. To him, use eye contact meant lift your chin, but had no idea what to do with it. We do this too, the think with your eyes, with all levels. And if different day, I give all-day workshops around the country. I talk at length about how poor an observer our students are who need to be working on self-regulation. And we have to not just try to get them to regulate their behaviors, but to be more mindful of how they're really looking at and thinking about others. Same with keep your body in the group, keep your brain in the group, just giving them very explicit direction to start to get them aware of their body is interpreted. We can see when someone's spacing out. We can see when someone's not focused on the topic. They're running off on a tangent. And we talk about their body, their brain, and their eyes, and then we break that down in all different ways. So we have lessons like about cooperation. We teach kids to be, the difference between being a thinking about you person in a group versus a just me. A just me is a person who just does whatever they're thinking about. A thinking about you person, when you're in a group, thinks about not only one's own needs, but what's going on around me and what do I need to do to adapt to others. There's much longer, deeper lessons behind all these concepts. But ultimately, we're trying to help students increase their awareness, situational attention, where am I, social attention, what do I know about the people in this situation, social self-awareness, what am I expected to do when I compare myself to others. And those first three things, situational attention, social self-awareness, are what I'm really defining make up social attention. And with kids with poor attention spans, they'll go to doctors and they'll take tests, but those tests usually focus on objects or some item that you can actually measure that they're attending to or failing to attend to, which is how they may end up getting a diagnosis. But in our field, it's interesting that we pay almost no attention and have almost no measurements for social attention. I have to walk into a room, figure out where I am, who you are, do I know you, what's expected in this situation, if I know you, if I don't know you, how should I interact with you, and now I have to be aware of myself and how you're interpreting me and my own presence in that room. And putting all of those together obviously is going to help with social problem solving to help kids respond. So part of our treatment, part of our assessment and teaching goes into really let's break it down. We can't just keep telling our kids pay attention or, just behave. They need to get more information on studying the parts. And that's what I've been doing, really specializing in the last 15 years and seeing how responsive kids are, even kids with attitudes who are like going, I don't care about you. As we start to explain it, we kind of put them in the hats of we make them little social psychologists themselves. They have to start studying what they expect from other people and then start giving them a reason and an understanding about why you take that extra energy to start adapting your behavior and self-regulating. We have books out that are, both of these books you're seeing on your screen are award winners, and both of them have gone into the mainstream. You Are a Social Detective is used largely, not infrequently around the country in mainstream elementary schools, kindergarten, first, second, third grade. Our Socially Curiously Social is a book we've written for 14 to about 21-year-olds, and it's written to students in their voice about what is all this social emotional stuff, including some stuff on dating in that book. And then my core book that the public calls the Bible of my work, the real core, here's where to start for adults learning about it, is called Thinking About You, Thinking About Me, where I break all this down. I take it into a treatment strategy called social behavior mapping, where we teach kids about using these charts, how they can better understand a sense of responsibility. And there's a lot on assessment. And assessment not just for testing, but just understanding how to define and talk about the social challenges you might be seeing in the child you're living with or the kids you're teaching. So I have a lot of free information on my website. And if you see there's a tab called What's Social Thinking at socialthinking.com. And on that tab, it says Michelle's blog. If you click on that, it's not a traditional blog. It's somewhere I go to just post every month new strategies that I'm working on. I've got a lot on transition to adulthood, dealing with tricky kids, dealing with little kids, all different topics. So please avail yourself to the free materials on our website, as well as, feel free to check out. I think I've written over 20-something products at this point, and also have other people's work who I really respect involved in that. So sorry about the technology issues, but now I'm available for questions.
That was just totally fascinating. I have to say that as much as I've read and in our magazine and we've written about friendship and social issues, I don't think I've ever so crisply understood that it was mostly a problem of identifying with the other person rather than oneself, and that's
right.
Just very eye-opening.
I think that's really important. Let me just jump in to say a lot of people put kids with social problems, they say they have behavior problems, and they put them on behavior plans that reward whether a kid is behaving. But all of that only rewards a kid doing something for themselves, and they get a reward for doing it right, which I call it me thinking. But really what we want to do is put kids on plans that rewards them for when they make other people feel good, which I call we thinking or group thinking. When our kids are in classrooms, they're part of a group, but our behavior plans usually only just say, here, good, you sat with your mouth quiet, great, here's a reward, when rather it should be, wow, you made everyone else available for learning, we all enjoyed having you in the room, we want to give you a reward because we felt good about being with you, or we saw how hard you were working to be with us. Rather than just make it be about that one person.
That's great. I think one of the biggest questions that people are posing is, we have a whole range of very specific friendship problems, some of which I will pose to you as they're very specific. But the general question for many people is they can't come to meet with you. There may not be a program near them. What can they do? What's the best thing parents can do to support their children?
So,
and to help them identify sort of me thinking versus you thinking.
As part of this webinar, I was giving like the briefest of introductions to kind of a really big concept. And one of the things I didn't cover in the introduction is through my work, one of the things I quickly found in the 90s was that people were like, it's very common for parents to say, okay, or parents are told, you need to put them in a social group. So then they say, okay, all ADD or ADHD kids show up at, 3 o'clock and we'll have the social skills group. But what I find in any of these diagnostic categories is there's a huge mix of social abilities. So some kids are really spaced out and very clueless about what's going on around them. They're not aware they don't have friends. They're not aware that people even have thoughts. And those kids need a whole different treatment and have a different prognosis than kids who are acutely aware, realize that people are not embracing them, and those kids often get incredible social anxiety and depression as they get up into middle school, high school, if not before. And so the first thing is to realize there isn't a one-size-fits-all treatment, that the social mind is not a black or white place, that there's different abilities. And I have a free article on my website under What Social Thinking. It's called the Social Thinking Social Communication Profile. And it's 32 pages because this is not a quick topic, but it's free. And it outlines how we start to understand the more literal a kid is, because usually if a kid is really spaced out and not aware he has friends, he's also really literal in his class, and he also has academic problems. But teachers often summarize and go, oh, no, he's smart on a test, so he's just a behavior problem in class. So that's the first thing, is to really understand how we can drill down and understand our kids' needs more compared to the typical kid. And then when we get into treatment, we want to really measure how well we really want to focus on how this kid is learning compared to himself. So the goal is to not have our kids become whatever this concept of normal social skills is. Our kids are born to learning differences, and I think the ADD, ADHD community has done a great job really showing how neurological, brain-based these problems are. These are not behavior problems caused by lack of parenting. These kids are incredibly hard to parent. And so this is brain-based. That's what we call neurological. And so kids have different types of neurology. Even though they may have one common diagnosis, it doesn't mean they all behave the same way. So our goal is to keep helping to teach them different ways to handle whatever mindset or brain abilities they're born to. So now we have to break it down and start with, the next thing we have to look at is developmental. There's different social behaviors for kindergarten, second graders, fourth graders, sixth graders, and so there isn't just like, let's just go teach him conversational skills, because kindergarten kids don't converse in the same way as 12-year-olds, but boys converse differently from girls. And so now we have to look at how old are they? If you're in third grade, what are the social expectations of third graders? If you're in fifth grade, what are the social expectations? And people go, oh my God, how do you figure all that out? And it's like, you just watch all the other kids in the class. Like, what is the culture of that school in that class, or what's the culture on the playground, to try to figure out what the expectations are. And so I guess to your question, it sounds like an easy question, like how do we begin?
No, it's not. I know it's not.
But it's actually a journey.
Yeah.
And I think, what I would like the listener to leave with today is just starting to, in their own mind, tear apart the social experience that they experience, so they can start to see what our kids have to learn. So, for example, if we're in a conference room together, I frequently ask my conference attendees during break time to not think about anyone else. Just go get your needs met. So you wouldn't wait in line. If you have to go to the bathroom, you just push, go up to the front, climb under the stall, take the person off the toilet, sit on it, right? To do anything differently would mean you're thinking about somebody else's needs. So, and then people really can't do that, obviously. So then I get them to think about, well, why can't you do it? And it's because their social thinking won't let them. And then you have to figure out, okay, well, how should I behave in this situation? Now, those are your social skills. And just start breaking this down in your mind and watching yourself and watching your own emotional reactions. And then you start to realize, okay, treatment begins with us breaking this down. Because in the past, treatment's been too much about you're coming to a social skills group so you can learn how to behave. So now we want you to practice having a conversation together. But that's way too high. Our kids need to start with, is your body in the group? Are you facing us? Where are your shoulders? What are you doing with your eyes? Are you thinking about what we're thinking about right now? We play games to get kids used to thinking with their eyes. I've written this up in that Thinking About You, Thinking About Me book, and then I have a whole red book that's a curriculum that gives lessons after lesson are related to this.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna be reading that book very shortly. It's often said with ADHD kids that they're 3 years developmentally behind their chronological age. Should parents be thinking about, if they have a sixth grade child or a high schooler, trying to understand the social skills of children younger than they are, and yet our children are in the grade that they're in, and they're living with kids who are the chronological age that they are. So
yeah, it's a good question. Here's some of our challenges that we all know. Many kids with ADD, ADHD look like typical kids. They don't look like they really have a huge social problem. Now, there's about 33% of kids with ADHD, ADD have autism. And so sometimes it's more obvious for if you're more on the obvious end of the autism spectrum, people can see it. But there's a whole group of kids in my profile I call the nuance kids. They look like everybody else. So no one's going to eyeball them and go, oh, he's got social issues. But other kids, we can do that. If you've got a weird tone of voice or your body's always, turned away or and you look really obvious. So many ADD kids don't look obvious. So it's hard to hold them accountable to an age group younger than themselves because they're immersed in the social expectations of their own age. So the best diagnosticians anywhere in the world, it's not the professionals, it's the peer group. Every single one of us is a trained and skilled social diagnostician. So the peers are the first to figure out who gets it socially, who doesn't. The peers jump in and start, tricking kids who can't figure things out. So now when we're looking at, all right, we know he's delayed. He might be 3 years delayed. Some of our kids are 1/3 delayed. It kind of seems like they're acting, 1/3 younger than their age. So now our goal is to help that kid learn and adapt his behaviors, but it's not to catch up. It's to just start where they are. And so one of our first questions are, how obvious is it? If it's really obvious to everybody else that this kid, his brain just doesn't get it, more people are going to cut him some slack. And then we do keep teaching. If it's less obvious, our teachings have to be more subtle, because the less obvious kids do have some basic social knowledge, but now we got to get them to be better observers. Like if you're blurting out in class all the time, it really does frustrate people. So usually a social skills approach would say, just be quiet. Well, being quiet doesn't solve a whole lot, because you're a person who wants to be heard and recognized. So it's not like a black or white, be quiet or speak. It's how do I get you to observe so you can figure out, is the teacher looking at you? Is this a time that you're welcome to talk? Is everybody else quiet? If everyone else is quiet, this is the time you should be quiet. Now, the problem with that is some of our kids would rather get attention than be quiet, because when they're quiet, no one pays any attention. They don't have any friends, and it's better to at least attract attention, because at least someone notices you. So then we start trying to find peer mentors in the class who can help to relate to this person and coach them using social thinking vocabulary. So that's just some of the different ways in which we approach this. And then I've had parents say to me, my kid is really mature for his age. He's really into, really intellectual topics, and most of our kids relate really well to adults. Not all of them, but the majority relate well to their adults. They do worse with their peer group. So then parents have said, well, since they relate so well to adults, can't we just wait till they become adults and they'll be fine? But the problem with that thinking is that we have different social codes for adults with children. Adults will allow children to speak about what they want to speak about, and we adapt to that as adults. But with our fellow adults, they become our peers, and now we go back to wanting the peer that we're relating to as an adult to not monopolize the conversation. They've got to think about us. They have to adapt to us.
We have a number of people on the webinar whose kids are, I think this speaks to your point, who are very aware of the fact that they don't have friends and very lonely, and as you said, develop anxiety, depression. What's a good strategy for talking to kids about these issues? What can you say to your children who are really sad that they don't have friends?
And this seems
like often a middle school, high school.
Yeah, and middle school is just a horrible time. It's just so tough because normally developing kids are regressing in their social behaviors in middle school. They are less good perspective takers. In middle school, things just get really out of joint, and kids can be just so brutally awful to each other. Well, here's some things to look at, because we absolutely, a couple of tenets that I follow is, one is called compassionate honesty, that we absolutely want to be compassionate, but some of our kids do things that make other people upset. So when you you don't adapt your behavior well, you may be doing stuff that other kids are thinking are really rude. So like an ADHD 16-year-old I was working with, he was telling me, everyone thinks I'm arrogant, argumentative, annoying, and he said, I think I'm really intelligent and caring. And so then I put him in a group with other kids like him, and he actually was really argumentative, arrogant, and annoying, because what he would do is he would see somebody misspelled a word, and he would reach over to that person and say, I can't believe you don't know how to spell that word, and then he would cross it out and he would spell it correctly, and he goes, see, that's how you spell it. So and then he looked at me, and I talked to him about it. He goes, but that's how I care. I show people I'm caring by spelling the word correctly. But what he didn't understand was the way he went about it was just really rude. And so that would be the arrogance and annoyance. And so then he would come to me and say, I'm really sad I don't have a friend. So I can't really jump in and say, oh, poor you, nobody treats you well. I got to work with him on, hey, well, I know your intentions are good, but people aren't getting that, right? So now we got to think about how people are seeing that. One of the great challenges of our higher level kids who have a lot of awareness is they have really good intentions, but the way they code their behavior does not make people necessarily think they have good intentions.
Absolutely. I've seen, that is so accurate. It really is. They come across in a way that they don't understand. Yeah.
And even kids who say, okay, listen, I don't bother anybody. Like, I stay out of everyone's way. I don't even talk to anyone, but people treat me badly. And that's because if you are showing up as intelligent in a class and people can see that you're doing the work in the class and then you choose not to talk to anybody, you stay really quiet, that action is actually offensive in itself. Because by you not talking to people, you're actually showing people that you're judging them. Every one of us in the social world, we're not passive, we're active. We're actively interpreting people around us, and we want people to make us feel good. We want people to make us feel intelligent and validated. So if you're around me and you're always quiet, I think you don't like me. We all get paranoid.
But that brings up another point that is I've heard before, I've experienced in my own family and is also raised by a couple of people in this webinar, and is our kids oftentimes have a really hard time with casual conversation. The little chit-chat, the little things that teens say to one another. I mean, that's really tough for a lot of kids, and which leads to the saying nothing and being perceived as being, arrogant or whatever. How to cope with that?
So getting into small talk, and then as you guys, as the listeners listen to this conversation, not everything we're saying is going to relate to every person, because there's not only different developmental ages and different functioning levels, people have different temperaments with social, so it's this big, Pandora's box. But for many kids who don't engage in small talk, there's a couple of things that may be going on. And this can be adults too. This conversation is not limited to kids. One group of folks I work with just think it's stupid. There is nothing intellectual going on when you say, what are you doing this weekend? Can you believe the weather? Or I hope the Broncos win, and I live in San Francisco. Why should I even care, right? And so people are like, it's so stupid. I'm not going to engage in stupid stuff. But what they don't realize is that you and I are actually sending messages to each other as to how available we are to talk to each other. So if you're talking to someone in line and you go, something like, oh, my God, it's been so cold, what you're doing is showing that person an intention is to acknowledge them, that you want to communicate with them, and that makes people feel included. So our folks get stuck at the level of, a subgroup of our folks get stuck in the actual intelligence of the words, when it's not really about the words. It's about the fact that you want to include people and show them that you're interested in them, and we do this slow little dance through small talk there. Another group of kids have limited cognitive flexibility, and so they get thrown with, when you ask them a question, they're not sure how they're supposed to interpret it. And so they're really much more comfortable. Some of our kids love getting up on stage. They love theater because you put a script in their hand and they know how to relate because they read the script. It tells them. But a conversation is never a script. It's, I say something, now I have to listen to what you're saying. I have to think about your perspective. I have to understand your belief system might be different from mine, and then I have to respond on that. So there's all these pass-throughs in our mind to get there. So, the first step with kids who struggle with conversation is, or small talk is a little bit different from conversation, is kind of figuring out, okay, what's our theory as to why this kid's struggling? And often, if you just ask the person, they'll tell, start throwing questions out, like, do you think it's dumb? Or you tell me, why don't you like small talk? Or you start observing them and you notice that they just don't know what to say. So then you have, like, we draw thought bubbles on paper. And I do this little activity with I developed this around cognitive flexibility because our guys don't think they have anything to say. So then I play this game, and I'll play this game with you for a minute. When I say a word, you say a word that you think of related to it. So if I say blue, you say?
Sky.
Sky. I say airplane.
Airport.
Holland.
Tulips.
Cheese.
Mac and cheese.
Okay, perfect. All right, so saw where we went on that? Like we just tagged off each other's responses, and pretty much everyone I work with can do that activity. The next level of that activity is I say, okay, that's cool. Now tell me the thinking that led to the word. So when I said blue, you would say something like, the sky is blue. And then I would say, you know, I fly on airplanes all the time in the sky, so it makes me think of airplane. And then you could say, well, airplanes make me think of airports. So then I go, okay, this is beginning how we build conversations. Because when we say something to each other, we trigger a thought, and then we narrate that thought, and that's how we start getting into conversational language. Because our guys, often our folks are taught, you should only talk about other people, you shouldn't talk about yourself. But that's not true either. Most of us spend our entire lives almost only talking about ourselves in conversation. But we make our lives connect to each other's lives by saying, oh, you said that, it made me think of this. And then I start talking, and then you go, oh, yeah, and that made me think of this. And so then we start playing games to help them see the tool bag that goes into when do you ask questions to, you know, how do you ask a question to another person? What do you know about them? What do you remember? How do you ask a question? But we don't just always ask questions. We listen to people, and then we tag on to, oh, what they just said reminded me of my own experience, and now I bring that in on my experience.
That's just absolutely inspired.
Okay, but I have to tell you, this can sound so easy for me to say, you know, on this call.
This is hard.
It is such slow learning because literally what seems so easy to us who learned it intuitively, they have to learn it cognitively. And one of the biggest things professionals and parents need to be is patient with the fact, don't freak out that your kid doesn't have these skills and they'll never get them, because we do see maturity as our kid's friend. Kids do start to move from being impulsive to more contemplative, especially when they're encouraged. And that's some of the really nice stuff, you know, in the ADHD body of literature is, you know, in more recent years, the ADHD community is really saying, hey, don't just medicate our kids, teach our kids. This is a neurological problem. Our kids' brains, it's not just that they don't have a chemical, they have differences in how they actually learn and focus and attend to information. And they need to practice stop and think. They need to and it's not stop and think for a minute, it's stop and think for a second, but in that second, it's amazing how many thoughts we have, and we organize ourselves in seconds, in milliseconds, and to really appreciate that in social communication, in behavior regulation, these are all tied to each other. And on my website, you can read about how I talk about how this is tied to the Common Core curriculum, that it's tied to how you write an essay. So many of our kids have trouble writing. How do you organize the thoughts in your head? How do you understand the narrative that you're writing? A lot of this comes back to social cognition, but social cognition has never really, it's never really been studied in a big way that we apply it to our people. Social cognition has been more studied in an esoteric way. And so how do we get really learning social cognitive strategies? So that's why I call it social thinking, to make it less intimidating than the word cognition. It's just how we think socially.
Here's sort of a different angle. A number of the writers who have sons, and I don't see this often with mothers of girls, but have sons who claim that they don't have friends and they don't care. They don't want friends. They don't need friends. They're perfectly happy the way they are. Their parents are miserable and worried and concerned, trying to arrange play dates, which they say their sons oftentimes actually enjoy, but the sons are really sort of saying, you know, I'm fine working on my computer. I don't really need friends.
Right. And technology has definitely made things harder in all of that because, there's a few different ways my mind goes in like 4 different directions when I get asked this question, which is common. And one is, our kids are, especially when you get up to the ages where you're upper elementary school, middle school, high school, where kids are actually getting on games which they're playing with other people on the internet, so third-party games, and kids are genuinely building some relationships on the
that's
computer?
another question that has been posted. My son thinks he has friends, but they're online only.
Right. So then that's the one of the things that we're seeing with our clients, and my clients even tell me this. I love working with older folks, my adolescents and even middle school and older, because they can actually tell me more about their thinking than little kids. But when they're on the computer, they don't have to deal with the complexity of processing and responding to so many social cues. It's a very linear stream of communication. It's language-based. You don't have to listen to my tone of language, and you don't, typically, unless you're on headsets. And then you hear the tone, but you don't have to read my face. You don't have to look at my eyes to see what direction I'm, looking at. And so we've really sterilized that process, and it's less dimensional. And our guys who struggle with integrating multiple cues are doing better with that more streamlined communication. And to be fair, these truly are relationships that they're building. They look forward to talking to each other online. They're working out problem solving together because they're buddying up depending on what they're playing with folks in terms of strategizing and helping each other get through. So it's not that the people online are not real. They are real, but they're not first person. They're not, three-dimensional relationships. And the human body, for the most part, the human mind craves touch. It craves some sense of intimacy, and a friendship is a form of intimacy. Someone shows up to be with me. I'm not sitting by myself in the cafeteria or on a bench on the playground all the time. Somebody's sitting with me. And that alone makes us feel better. So rather than say those aren't real friends, we would just take a different tact on it, and we'd say, okay, they're people that you enjoy playing games with, but having someone to be with who can come hang out at the house or at the mall. And then our kids go, well, I don't care. I don't want that. So when I work with folks around that, usually what I find when I really get to know someone and drill down on that is that they're saying it because what they know in themselves is that this is so hard for them that it's easier to say I don't care than to have to engage in doing it. And it's so horrible to be at school and see all these kids buddy up, whether they're just, because kids, like if you look at them on a playground, they're actually not like talking all the time. They're sitting there looking at their cell phones, they're texting each other, they're listening to music, or they just hang out standing around and only one person's talking. But just to be included in a group. So, yeah. And so what I work with my folks on is once I get to know them, and they're, one of my clients, because the art of getting to know the person is important too, right? Like, who are you and what do I need to talk to you about, is helping them to go, I'll say things like, gosh, I know your brain mix is hard for you. And I literally talk to my students a lot about what their brain makes hard for them, what their brain makes easy. And I'll say, I know your brain makes this a little bit harder for you. And then if I know this kid a little bit, and he's going, I don't care. I don't care how you feel. I don't care how I treat, that I don't care about any of it. If I know this kid, then I say to him things like, gosh, I'm sorry you came to see me today. It would have been so much easier if you weren't here. I have to develop a plan when I work with you. I have to write notes. Like, really, it would have been better if you didn't show up today. And the kid often looks at me and goes, Michelle, what are you doing? Like, it's me. I'm here right now. And I'm like, oh, does that bother you? And he goes, yeah, you shouldn't say that stuff to me. And I said, I knew you cared. And I go, it's not that you don't care. It's that it's hard for you to figure out how to make it happen. And it's easier just to say, forget about it. I'm fine being by myself. But the human brain isn't fine being by themselves. They get anxious. They get depressed. And so now we have to figure out, okay, what can we do to help you? And helping you, like, now we have to say, let's not plan on you having 6 friends. Let's figure out how you can start talking to one person. And you can't decide who your friend is. It's mutual. So then we have to start defining what are friends. And then I have this thing I've developed called the pyramid of friendship, and this really came from one of my ADHD adolescents coming to me going, Michelle, you got to teach me how to make a friend. And I kept thinking I was. This is the kid who was misspelling, correcting people's spelling, because I was helping them do things that were, positively perceived out there. but he kept saying, "Gotta tell me how to make a friend." So I finally listened to him because clearly I wasn't meeting his need, and I came out. I was listening, to a number of my kids, and I created a thing called the Pyramid of Friendship. And at the bottom, it starts with greetings. The next level is acquaintance. The next level is situational friendships. The next level is kind of friend. The next level is bonded friend. Next level is close friend. And what we looked at was what's the difference between friendly and friendship, because a lot of our folks just are confused right there. They think friendly is friendship, but
right,
those
absolutely.
are different. And then when I showed that pyramid, and I created a pyramid shape because I wanted to show them we say hi to more people than we have acquaintances. We have less friends than we have acquaintances. We have less bonded friends than we have friends. We have less close friends than we have bonded friends. And I've defined all these. And when I showed it to my group, one of the girls in the group went, "Oh my God, I thought I had all these friends, and at the very best, all I have are acquaintances." And it's
right.
like, okay, well, what do you want for yourself? Well, I want to have more friends. All right, then what do you have to do to move from being an acquaintance to actually showing someone that you're interested in them enough that you actually plan to hang out together? And that was like with my guy who really made me think in this direction. He was the kid who was, considered annoying and arrogant. What I found with him is he was great at saying hi to everybody. He had a really nice way that he just said hi, but he wasn't good at all at sitting in a class and just having an acquaintance, just calmly talking to the person next to him and showing that
right.
other person he was interested in. What he would do in a class.
That's a bit of a small talk business problem as well.
But what he did in a class is he would come in, he would say hi, and then he would just start cracking jokes to the whole class. And people were just annoyed, like he was interrupting everybody. He made it all be about himself. So then we started moving on. Okay, how do you get the attention of one person? How do you do it without everybody looking at you? And what are the little things you can say to just start to let people know that you're actually interested in them and it's not all about you?
Right.
And we just built it step by step. Okay, now that you've got an acquaintance, what are you going to do? So to say to that person, hey, I was working him into college. What do you want to go have coffee, after class, or what are you doing during, recess time for little kids? And we start getting them to figure out those tag questions to show people I'm interested in being with you. Most of us are a little bit honored when somebody wants to be with us, unless that person we find really offensive.
People are wondering whether this pyramid of friendship, which sounds so helpful, is on your website, or whether
it is not yet posted on the website.
Okay.
It's in my book, Socially Curious, Curiously Social. But if you sign up for my email newsletter,
great idea.
only put it out about every 3 or 4 weeks, and we don't burden you with content, but we let you know about our conferences. But in every newsletter, we literally give news. So I always write something for every newsletter that is a strategy, a concept. Like I just posted a big thing on social media. So if you look under the blogs, that's where all this stuff is. And that we may end up writing something about the pyramid. It is a really common sense tool, and that's what we do in social thinking. Is we take this abstract stuff and we break it down to a really concrete place, and then we start teaching within it. But we do not expect perfection. We don't expect people to become whatever people think normal is. We only want to help a kid we only expect them to get better compared to themselves. So we will celebrate really small change. Like I got a kid who's got all these behavior problems at school. People have really written them off. But now it's like we're trying to change the game. Okay, choose 2 people you want to say hi to and just say hi to those 2. Now, sit next to one of those in a class and start just talking to them calmly. So we strip it all down. We kind of remove some of the noise in the crowds, and we start rethinking how they're engaging. So the hardest thing is people, once they start teaching something, they want everyone to just fix it. Okay, he should do it. He's a bright kid.
Just get it.
Done with it by now.
Right.
This is something they'll work on their entire lives. And then, kind of as we're wrapping up, if you need to, I can go a little bit later. I know we did because of the whole mess up. But
we're just a little
realizing let me just say, the neurological research says the frontal lobe stops developing at 25-year-old. And so people think, oh, the brain is developed at 25 years old. The literature is wrong. Your brain will continue to develop the rest of your life. look at your own lives, and you are better off than you were socially 10 years ago. And that's because you learned more and more strategies. So don't ever think there's a limit in age to the ability to learn. Our kids are learning. I love working with my adults. I've got executives I work with for different companies. I've got kids I work with. We've got adult university groups, because everybody's there to learn. So the social thing, kind of sadly in our culture, if you've got social issues as adults, we send you to counseling to just counsel through it rather than teach you new strategies. And we're always there to learn new strategies, and our kids can be too. They're on a little bit slower ride. They may not literally catch up in the sense of normal, but their lives can get better compared to themselves. But we also have to appreciate teenagers aren't necessarily always showing up to learn in the same way that a 25-year-old is. So we're going to find some years are easier to learn and learn from. And so you also don't want to say, oh, we tried that when he was 16, so we're not going to do it again. Do it again. The kid's in a different place.
One thing I'm taking away from this really wonderful webinar is that we need to be very compassionate. I mean, we need to, not, it's very difficult. Well, not to, as you've said, our children are very hard to parent, but not to blame and to really come at it from a point of view of helping them learn.
So, Russ Green said it really well.
Yeah, he's great.
He said,
he's really great.
They would if they could. But then there's this fine line between compassion and responsibility. So in our compassion, we should not dismiss the responsibility. Our kids have to learn to help themselves, because they do need to show up and be trying to work on some things, because it does get incredibly frustrating when we just say, oh, you poor thing, you've got this label, and then we let them get away with everything, and then that creates a beast of an adult. So we also...
last question. Is there any website or place where people can find professionals around the country that they can consult? Is there an association, people trained in your method, or is, because everyone's sort of wanting to find someone like you nearby?
So social thinking is very grassroots, and we've, just because I'm a master's and I've never been affiliated with a hospital or university, but a number of people, it's hundreds of people over the last 10 years have come to my clinic to seek out an extra 3 days of watching us in clinic to really sit and have conversations with us. And we've posted their names on our website under our professional tab. You can look up the state that you live in, and then you can look within that state who is there. Some of the people are in private practice and some work in the schools, but that would be a place to start. And then the other place to go is, and this is how social thinking really got started through the mainstream, I think, was with parents sharing our materials, because we do have so many materials. Everything that I've written is very folksy and user-friendly. So it's not like ivory tower reads. I don't use vocabulary. I try to break this down in very concrete ways. So people also will, if their counselor doesn't know about social thinking, but the kid likes working with a counselor, then get them some articles off our website, or bring them a book that's related to your kid's age, and say, hey, can you learn about these strategies, and let's try taking them through some social thinking, because this is new to the majority of professionals out there. As much as in my little small world, a lot of people know me. When you get into the big world out there, we're still a pretty unknown entity. So feel free to share it. Anything that's posted on the website can be downloaded, shared, attached, transferred.
That's great. Thank you so much, Michelle. This is terrific. And maybe we can even get Michelle to come back in a few months and do another round. There are a lot of questions here that I would love to have had the time to ask you. So thank you so much again, and have a great weekend. Bye, everyone.
Take care. Bye.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.
You love podcasts, the stories, the laughs, the unexpected turns. But when this episode ends, the silence starts. Not anymore. Audiobooks.com turns that silence into your next great adventure. With over 450,000 titles, from bestsellers to hidden gems, your love for listening just found its new best friend. And because you already know the joy of audio, we're giving you 3 free audiobooks to start your journey. Imagine your favorite podcast, now with unlimited episodes. That's audiobooks.com. Keep the story going. Sign up for your free trial at audiobooks.com/podcastfree today. Because for podcast lovers like you, the end of an episode is just the beginning. That's audiobooks.com/podcastfree.